Imagine living in a world where kings could command armies, conquer cities, and control entire kingdoms. And yet, before making their most important decisions, they would climb mountains or enter dark underground chambers to ask a woman a single question. What do the gods want? Thousands of years ago, two places became famous for answering that question. One stood high on the slopes of Mount Parnassus in Greece. The other stood beside the volcanic landscapes of southern Italy. One was Delphi, the other was Cumae. And at the center of both were women believed to possess something no king could command, the ability to hear the voice of the divine. But who were these women? And did they really believe they could see the future? To understand the power of the ancient oracles, we have to forget the way we think about prophecy today. For the Greeks and Romans, an oracle was not simply a fortune teller. An oracle was a bridge, a place where the human world could, supposedly, communicate with the divine. People came with questions about almost everything. Should a city go to war? Where should a colony be founded? Would a ruler succeed? Should a journey begin? Sometimes, the questions were deeply personal, and the answers could influence decisions made by entire nations. But there was something fascinating about these sacred places. The gods did not simply appear and speak directly to the people. Instead, their messages were believed to pass through a human intermediary. And in the ancient Mediterranean, some of the most powerful intermediaries were women. Two of the most famous were separated by hundreds of kilometers: the Pythia of Delphi and the Sibyl of Cumae. Their stories were different, but both became symbols of humanity's desire to know what lies beyond the visible world. High above central Greece, surrounded by the dramatic cliffs of Mount Parnassus, lies Delphi. To the ancient Greeks, this was no ordinary sanctuary. It was believed to be one of the most sacred places on Earth. According to mythology, Zeus once wanted to discover the center of the world. He released two eagles from opposite ends of the Earth. They flew toward one another and met above Delphi. From that moment, the sanctuary became associated with the idea of the world's center. At Delphi stood the sanctuary of Apollo, the god associated with prophecy, music, healing, and light. And inside the sacred complex was a woman whose reputation would eventually spread throughout the Mediterranean. Her name was the Pythia, the Oracle of Delphi. For centuries, kings, generals, politicians, and ordinary people traveled to Delphi, hoping to hear Apollo's will. The sanctuary became so influential that its advice could affect politics, warfare, and the founding of entire colonies. Delphi was no longer simply a religious site. It had become a center of power. The Pythia was not a single woman who lived for centuries. Instead, the title belonged to a succession of priestesses who served the oracle. Before entering the sacred area, the petitioner would undergo rituals of purification. Offerings were made, questions were prepared, and eventually the Pythia entered the restricted inner part of Apollo's temple. There, she would sit upon a sacred tripod. Ancient writers describe her entering a state of divine inspiration. Her words could be difficult to understand. Priests were involved in communicating and interpreting the oracle's response. And this is where Delphi became especially fascinating. Because the answers were often not simple. They could be ambiguous. They could be interpreted in more than one way. And sometimes that ambiguity became part of the oracle's power. The famous story of King Croesus illustrates this perfectly. Croesus, ruler of Lydia, wanted to know whether he should attack the Persian Empire. The oracle gave him a response that could be understood as saying that if he attacked, he would destroy a great empire. Croesus attacked, and he was defeated. The empire that was destroyed was his own. The story may be legendary in its details, but it captures something important about Delphi. The oracle did not necessarily give people the certainty they wanted. It gave them words they had to interpret. and sometimes the consequences of that interpretation could change history. But what actually happened inside the temple? For centuries, one of the greatest mysteries surrounding Delphi has been the state of the Pythia herself. Ancient sources describe divine inspiration. Later writers proposed more natural explanations. Some theories suggested that geological activity beneath the sanctuary may have contributed to unusual experiences. The sanctuary lies in a geologically active region, and researchers have investigated faults and natural gases in the area. But there is no simple answer. We cannot travel back in time and observe a consultation. We cannot know exactly what the Pythia experienced. Perhaps religious expectation played a role. Perhaps ritual, psychology, environment, and belief all interacted. Or perhaps the ancient Greeks simply understood the experience differently from us. What we do know is that people believed, and that belief gave the oracle extraordinary influence. But Delphi was not the only place where people sought supernatural answers. Far to the west, another oracle was waiting, in a landscape that looked almost like the entrance to another world. On the coast of southern Italy, near modern Naples, stood Cumae. Founded by Greek settlers around the 8th century BC, Cumae became one of the earliest Greek colonies in the western Mediterranean. But the region had something that made it especially mysterious. It was volcanic. The Campi Flegrae, the Phlegraean fields, were shaped by immense geological forces. Smoke, heat, underground activity, and strange landscapes surrounded the ancient settlement. For the people who lived there, it was easy to imagine that the boundary between the human world and the underworld was thin. And here, according to ancient tradition, lived one of the most famous prophetic figures of antiquity, the Sibyl of Cumae. Unlike the Pythia, she was not simply associated with a temple on a mountain. She became part of a much darker tradition. She was a prophetess who lived near the entrance to the realm of the dead, and eventually her story would become deeply connected with Rome itself. The Cumaean Sibyl appears most famously in the writings of the Roman poet Virgil. In the Aeneid, the hero Aeneas travels to Cumae. He seeks the Sibyl because he wants to descend into the underworld and speak with the dead. The Sibyl becomes his guide. She tells him that entering the realm of the dead will not be easy. But if destiny allows it, a path will open. This story transformed Cumae into something larger than an archaeological site. It became a legendary gateway between worlds. The Sibyl was no longer simply a prophetess, she was a guide between life and death, and her reputation continued to grow. Roman tradition also connected the Cumaean Sibyl with the legendary Sibylline Books. According to the story, a mysterious woman offered prophetic books to the Roman king Tarquin. When he refused her price, she destroyed some of them. She returned again, and again, until only a few remained. The king eventually purchased them. These books were later believed to contain prophecies that could be consulted during moments of crisis. Whether these stories preserve historical memories or later traditions, they reveal something remarkable. The Romans believed that prophetic knowledge could be so valuable that even a king could not afford to ignore it. And then there is the mysterious structure at Cumae known today as the Antro della Sibilla, the Cave of the Sibyl. It is an enormous passage carved into volcanic tuff beneath the ancient Acropolis. Its long, dark corridor seems almost designed for a story about prophecy. But archaeology tells us something unexpected. The structure visible today is generally interpreted as a military gallery, probably constructed during the Samnite period, centuries after the traditional era of the Sibyl. Its identification as the Sibyl's Cave became popular much later. In the 20th century, archaeologist Amedeo Maiuri associated the structure with the descriptions found in Virgil. The architecture seemed to fit certain elements of the ancient poem. Darkness, passages, openings allowing strange shafts of light, and chambers that could be imagined as places of prophecy. But there is an important distinction. The famous cave may not actually be the cave described by Virgil. And this uncertainty makes Cumae even more fascinating, because sometimes archaeology does not solve a mystery. It reveals how much of the mystery remains. Delphi and Cumae were separated by the sea, but their stories share a remarkable pattern. At Delphi, a woman spoke in the sanctuary of Apollo. At Cumae, a woman became the legendary voice of a mysterious prophetic tradition. At Delphi, people climbed toward the sacred mountain. At Cumae, they descended toward darkness. One place became associated with Apollo and the center of the Greek religious world. The other became associated with the Sibyl, Aeneas, and the mysterious boundary between the living and the dead. And yet, both served the same human desire. The desire to know what cannot be known. What will happen tomorrow? Will we succeed? Should we continue? Is our destiny already decided? Perhaps that is why the stories of the ancient oracles survived for so long, because even after the temples fell silent, the questions remained. Eventually, the ancient world changed. Greek and Roman religious traditions lost their dominance. Christianity spread across the Mediterranean. Sacred sanctuaries declined, and places that had once attracted kings and pilgrims gradually became ruins. Delphi fell silent. Cumae became abandoned and was slowly buried by time. But the oracles did not disappear completely. Their stories survived in poetry, literature, archaeology, and legend. The Pythia became an enduring symbol of prophecy. The Sibyl became a symbol of the mysterious voice of the ancient world. And today, when we walk through the ruins of Delphi or enter the dark passages of Cumae, we are left with a strange thought. Perhaps the most fascinating thing about the ancient oracles is not whether they could predict the future. It is that thousands of people were willing to travel enormous distances because they believed someone, somewhere, might know the answer. The temples are ruins now. The priests are gone. The questions have changed, but humanity's fascination with the unknown has not. From the heights of Delphi to the darkness beneath Cumae, the ancient world left behind two places where people believed the gods could speak. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not what the oracles knew. It is why we have always been so desperate to ask. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries of the ancient world, subscribe to Curiousphere, because history still has many secrets left to uncover.